Here is where we begin this hour. Right now, President Biden's national security advisor is in the West Bank to meet with the head of the Palestinian Authority. Earlier today, Jake Sullivan met with Israeli leaders and told reporters the U.S. wants to see results in reducing civilian casualties in Gaza. He did, though, downplay any rift between the White House and Israel over how this war should proceed.
A senior U.S. official telling CNN the White House wants Israel to transition to a more targeted phase within weeks, possibly even by the end of the year. Israel's defense minister, though, says the fighting will last, in his words, more than several months. Our own Alex Marquardt asked Jake Sullivan about that timeline this morning.
We are now in the middle of a high-intensity phase with ongoing ground operations, military operations, in both the northern half and the southern half of Gaza. But there will be a transition to another phase of this war, one that is focused in more precise ways on targeting the leadership. We're not here to tell anybody, you must do X, you must do Y. We're here to say, this is our perspective as your partner, as your friend. This is what we believe is the best way to achieve both your tactical and strategic goals.
Joining us now is Mark Regev. He's senior advisor to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, of course, a former Israeli ambassador to the UK. Good to have you with us, as always. There's a lot of back and forth on this timeline here. As we look at this, U.S. officials, as we have been talking about throughout the morning, hoping to see this transition in a matter of weeks, perhaps by the end of the year. I know you can't give me a date. Can you give me a better sense, though, of that timeline from Israel's point of view?
Yeah, we'll need more time, but the signs are positive. We're seeing the Hamas military machine in the northern Gaza Strip being destroyed as we speak. We're maybe close to the end of that. We're seeing increasing numbers of Hamas terrorists coming out with their hands up, holding their AK-47s above their head, surrendering to our forces. So I think there we're seeing the collapse of Hamas's military machine. In the south, where we started more recently, that'll take a bit longer. But it's clear we are moving ahead. To paraphrase Churchill, we are at the beginning of the end. And I think that will allow us, when we finish this this stage we're in at the moment, to move to the next stage of the conflict. But we have to finish the stage we're currently in. If we're seeing Hamas collapse in the north, we have to see them collapse in the south, too.
Talking about the collapsing of Hamas, a U.S. official also noting that they weren't entirely clear when Israel says the goal is to eradicate Hamas, what that translates to. Is it seeing the collapse as you're seeing now? Is it doing away with leadership? Is it literally going after every single Hamas supporter in Gaza? What do those words mean in terms of eradicating Hamas in this moment?
I think it means that we dismantle their military machine as a fighting force. We deny them the capability of attacking us ever again the way they did on October 7th. That's clear. In other words, as I say, dismantle their military terrorist capabilities. And of course, on the political side, reduce them. They will no longer be able to govern the Gaza Strip. Gaza will have, when this is over, a government that is not Hamas. Israelis simply refuse to live next to this enclave, this terrorist-controlled enclave on our southern border, in constant fear of terrorists crossing the southern frontier and butchering our children. No. So we will destroy their capability to inflict pain and murder upon us, and we will end their rule of the Gaza Strip.
As you know, President Biden has been more public and perhaps more forceful in his language lately, just yesterday saying, urging Israel to, in his words, and I'm quoting here, be more careful, specifically talking about civilian casualties. You know about the push in Washington when it comes to conditions on aid for Israel. Are you concerned about dwindling support from Israel's strongest ally because of the humanitarian crisis and the civilian deaths?
So we had very good conversations on these very issues yesterday with your national security advisor, and I think it's understood. And Israel understands this, of course, why we pursue this campaign against Hamas. And we will pursue the campaign, and Hamas will be defeated and destroyed. But as we do that in parallel, we will do everything we can to safeguard the civilian population. We don't want to see it caught up in the crossfire between the Israeli forces and Hamas, and to facilitate humanitarian aid for that civilian population to enter the Gaza Strip, to make sure there is food and water and medicine and shelter and medical support field hospitals for the civilian population who have suffered so much because of Hamas. Hamas that started this war, Hamas that uses them as a human shield for its war machine, Hamas that deliberately endangers them to try to keep itself alive.
I know you saw the reporting, because I know you spoke with my colleague Caitlin Collins about it last night, the reporting from our colleague Clarissa Ward in southern Gaza at that field hospital. There was a young woman in that piece who said to Clarissa, "The world isn't listening to us. Nobody cares about us. We've been dying for over 60 days. You talk about getting more aid in to field hospitals, food, water. The World Food Program declared a catastrophic hunger crisis in Gaza 10 days ago. How concerned are you about this growing humanitarian crisis? And in terms of getting that aid in, what can you promise this morning?
So I can promise that we will beef up our efforts together with the international community to make sure that food, water, medicine, all the elementary humanitarian supplies reach the people of Gaza. That is our commitment. In the first week of this war, we're going back now close to 70 days. We said the IDF places no limitations on food, water, and medicine going into the Gaza Strip. And we want to work very closely with our American partners, the United Nations and other humanitarian groups to make sure that that food, water, medicine enters the Gaza Strip and reaches the people. Now, here we have a problem because Hamas is in many ways wants to artificially manufacture a humanitarian crisis. They don't want food to reach the people. They want a crisis because that way they can have more pressure on us to cease our campaign. That's Hamas's lifeline. So it's crucial we succeed in making sure the aid reaches the people.
So what are those efforts this morning? For people who are just tuning in, they hear a lot about the need for fuel. They hear about the numbers of trucks. That doesn't always translate, though, in terms of what that means for relief on the ground. 85%, I believe, is the current number of people in Gaza have now been displaced by the fighting. Getting them to a place where they can get that food, where they can even access it and go out safely, as we know from our reporting and from others on the ground, is incredibly difficult. Can you just put that in numbers for folks this morning, what that could look like and when?
So I can tell you at the moment, as we speak, Israel has authorized and inspected trucks that are still waiting to go in. And there are logistic issues in southern Gaza. This is why we think maybe Hamas is not really playing the part, is playing a negative role here. Once again, we have authorized and inspected. We have to inspect all trucks going into Gaza for obvious reasons. We don't want Hamas receiving new munitions, new explosives, and so forth. But the trucks that have already been inspected and authorized are still being held up, not because of Israel. There might be objective logistic issues, but there's also the fact that Hamas here, we believe, is deliberately causing problems. They know that their lifeline is a ceasefire that stops Israel destroying their military machine. And they want that international pressure. We have to make sure the civilian aid reaches the civilians.
Before we let you go, President Biden, as you know, has been adamant that a two-state solution is still necessary after this war. In terms of Benjamin Netanyahu and the current Israeli government, are they open to a two-state solution?
So the formula that my prime minister uses, I think, is clear. He says the Palestinians should have all the powers to rule themselves and none of the powers to threaten Israel. And considering what happened on October 7th, I'm sure you can be very understanding of the second part of the formula, none of the powers to threaten Israel. On the basis of that formula, we're happy to move forward in discussions. The idea that Palestinians should be able to rule themselves, that is open. That's possible.
Mark Regev, I appreciate the time this morning. Thank you.
My pleasure.